The meat was giving off a slight odor, but hunger still convinced him that eating it wouldn't be a problem. Within an hour, his stomach was filled with cramp-like pains, and within 2 hours he could barely stand. There was no way of knowing exactly what was wrong. There was no medication to be taken, and no clear indication of whether this would go away in a few hours, or if something much more serious would happen. What your body does next, and what your group does in response, reveals a survival system driven entirely by necessity. At the end of this, you will understand that food poisoning could have been one of the most common threats faced by ancient people. Stick with this, because the body's own response mechanism becomes much more advanced than most people realize. In order to understand food poisoning in people in ancient times, it is first necessary to understand how difficult it is to assess whether food is really edible. Without refrigeration, without a reliable way to store meat for a long time, and without the concept of bacteria or contamination, ancient humans relied entirely on their senses, smells, appearance, and textures to make a decision that could decipher the difference between a normal meal and a life-threatening illness. Smell served as the first and most important line of defense. Certain compounds produced during meat spoilage create distinctly unpleasant odors, and ancient humans almost certainly developed a strong instinctive aversion to these smells over time, likely reinforced by painful past experience whenever that instinct was ignored. This wasn't a perfect system. Some dangerous contamination produces little to no detectable smell at all, meaning even the most cautious ancient human occasionally consumed something genuinely harmful, despite doing everything right by the standards available to him. Once contaminated food had actually been eaten, the body's response, though deeply unpleasant, was not random suffering. Vomiting and diarrhea, while miserable to experience, serve a specific biological purpose, rapidly expelling harmful substances from the digestive system before they can be fully absorbed into the bloodstream. Ancient humans experiencing this almost certainly had no understanding of why their body was reacting this way, only that it felt like their body was actively trying to fight something off. Now think about this for a moment. If you had eaten something that suddenly left you doubled over in pain, with absolutely no way to know whether it was a serious poisoning or something that would pass within hours, what do you think your first instinct would actually be? Try to force yourself to keep eating to regain strength. Stop eating entirely and simply wait it out. Or immediately try to expel whatever you had just consumed. Leave your answer below, because how people imagine responding here often reveals a lot about how they handle uncertainty under real physical stress. Water intake became critically important almost immediately, even though ancient humans had no formal concept of dehydration as we understand it today. Severe vomiting and diarrhea can rapidly drain the body of fluids, and someone already weakened by illness faced a genuine secondary danger from dehydration on top of whatever had caused the initial sickness. Groups appear to have instinctively understood that a sick person needed water constantly, likely learned through repeated observation of how quickly someone could weaken further. Certain plants appear to have played a role in managing the worst symptoms. Some ancient groups likely identified specific plants capable of settling stomach discomfort or reducing the severity of digestive distress, discovered entirely through trial, observation, and the accumulated experience of watching what seemed to help previous cases of similar illness within the group. This knowledge, passed down without any written record, represented a genuinely sophisticated body of practical medicine built purely from lived experience. There is a physical detail about how the body signals danger that most people never consider, and it explains why ancient humans sometimes avoided serious poisoning entirely without ever consciously deciding to. A strong bitter or unusually sharp taste in certain foods often serves as a natural warning sign, since many genuinely toxic compounds happen to taste unpleasant to the human palate as an evolved protective mechanism. Ancient humans who instinctively spit out or refused to swallow food with an unusually harsh, bitter, or otherwise wrong-feeling taste were likely relying on this same built-in warning system. even without any conscious understanding of why their mouth had reacted that way in the first place. Texture provided another subtle warning sign that experienced ancient humans likely learned to trust over time. Meat that had begun to spoil often developed a noticeably slimy or unusually soft texture well before the smell became overwhelming. And someone with enough repeated exposure to both safe and spoiled meat likely developed a strong tactile sense for detecting this early change, catching a problem before it became obvious through smell alone. This kind of layered sensory judgment, built from years of direct experience, rather than any single reliable indicator, likely explains why some individuals within a group consistently avoided poisoning while others, with less experience or attentiveness, fell ill more frequently from the exact same food sources. Children and the elderly likely faced meaningfully higher risk from food poisoning compared to healthy adults in their prime, a pattern that still holds true today for well-understood physiological reasons. Weaker immune response and reduced ability to handle rapid fluid loss from vomiting and diarrhea meant the same contaminated meal that caused a healthy adult several uncomfortable but survivable hours of illness could become genuinely dangerous for someone with less physical resilience. Groups likely paid closer attention to these more vulnerable members during any outbreak of illness within the camp, prioritizing their access to water and rest above other daily responsibilities during a recovery period. Shared meals created a genuine double-edged risk that ancient humans had to navigate constantly. Eating together as a group meant that a single contaminated food source could potentially sicken many people simultaneously. A serious problem if an entire hunting or gathering group became incapacitated at the same time in an environment that still demanded constant vigilance against other dangers. At the same time, this same shared meal pattern meant that when illness did strike multiple people at once, the connection to a specific food source became immediately obvious, likely accelerating how quickly a group learned to avoid that particular danger in the future. If this part surprised you, that vomiting and diarrhea actually served a protective biological purpose, rather than simply being random suffering, that is worth sitting with for a moment. Because it reframes an entire category of ancient illness as the body actively working to save itself, rather than simply falling apart. Isolation and rest played a meaningful role in recovery as well, though not necessarily by deliberate medical understanding. A severely sick individual was often physically unable to keep up with normal group activity, meaning he was naturally left to rest near the camp while others continued daily tasks. This forced rest, while not a conscious treatment decision in the modern sense, likely gave the body genuine recovery time it needed, time that would have been unavailable if the person had been forced to continue hunting, gathering, or traveling while severely ill. Group awareness of what specific food had caused the illness carried significant long-term value. If multiple people became sick after eating from the same source, the connection was likely obvious even without any scientific understanding of contamination, and that particular food source, whether a specific animal, plant, or water supply, would likely be avoided by the group going forward. This kind of collective memory, built entirely from painful shared experience, functioned as an early, informal food safety system passed down through observation rather than instruction. Not every case of food poisoning followed the same pattern of severity. Mild cases likely resolved within a day or two with rest and water alone, while more severe cases, involving genuinely dangerous contamination, could become life-threatening, particularly for anyone already weakened by poor nutrition, injury, or advanced age. Ancient humans watching a case worsen, rather than improve, with symptoms like extreme weakness, inability to keep any water down, or prolonged high fever, likely understood, even without medical training, that the situation had moved beyond what rest alone could resolve. Cooking meat thoroughly, beyond simply making it more palatable, likely provided real protection against certain contaminants, since heat can destroy many of the organisms responsible for foodborne illness. Ancient humans who consistently cooked meat fully, rather than eating it raw or undercooked, may have unknowingly reduced their risk of food poisoning significantly. Discovering this benefit purely through the repeated observation that thoroughly cooked meat seemed to cause illness far less often than meat eaten raw or barely prepared. Storage methods, however primitive, likely made a real difference as well. Ancient humans appear to have developed various techniques for preserving meat longer, including drying, smoking, and salting where salt was available, each of which happens to reduce the conditions that allow harmful contamination to develop. None of these methods were understood in terms of bacteria or spoilage science at the time, but their effectiveness at extending how long food remained genuinely safe to eat was likely obvious through direct, repeated experience within the group. Seasonal patterns likely influenced food poisoning risk considerably, though ancient humans would have understood this only through accumulated observation rather than any formal reasoning. Warmer temperatures accelerate spoilage significantly, meaning food that remained relatively safe for a day or two during cooler months could spoil dangerously fast during peak summer heat. Groups living through many seasonal cycles likely developed a stronger instinctive caution around food freshness during warmer periods specifically, adjusting how quickly they consumed hunted meat based on this pattern. There is one more detail worth mentioning before we close. Individuals within a group who developed a particularly reliable instinct for judging food safety, whether through smell, appearance, or simply broader experience with what had made others sick before, likely held real practical value within their community, a quiet form of expertise that directly protected the group from repeated, preventable suffering. So the next time you deal with a bout of food poisoning, remember that ancient humans faced this same fundamental danger constantly, without refrigeration, without medicine, and without any scientific understanding what was actually happening inside their bodies. They survived not through luck alone, but through careful sensory judgment, collective memory, and a body that, however miserable it felt in the moment, was actually working hard to protect itself, and in many cases, that combination of instinct and shared experience was the only real defense a group ever had. If this kind of detail is exactly what you come here for, this channel is built entirely around real questions like this, the specific hardships and instincts that never make it into the usual retelling of ancient human life. The small details that actually determined who recovered and who did not, and staying around means you will not miss the next one.